Moving into our next discussion. Our next discussion is titled, How Can We Articulate a Distinctive Vision for Christian Education in Our Post-Christian Society? Today we're going to hear from Dr. Simon Kennedy. Simon is the director of the Millis Institute and senior lecturer in humanities at Christian Heritage College. He is also a research fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities, the University of Queensland. He has worked in and with Christian schools for over a decade in a variety of capacities, including in relation to public policy, strategic advising, Christian worldview integration, and also music teaching. So let's welcome Dr. Simon Kennedy as he presents to us this morning.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you to Lynn and Leighton for inviting me to be here this morning. I don't actually have any slides, so I'm just going to do that, and I hope that's all right. First of all, I want to say it was a real privilege to speak with your teachers last week on Monday. I felt quite intimidated and out of place sharing the stage with such talented and competent ladies in Catherine and Inika. I was so super impressed with what they shared, and felt quite humbled to be sharing the stage with them. But it was great to be up there, and I hope that your teachers, your staff, found it encouraging and helpful, what I shared then. But we're going to be talking about something different today. The question, of course, as Paul's just articulated, is how can we, as in the Christian schooling sector, the royal we, articulate a distinctive vision for Christian education to our post-Christian society. And recently, as you're all aware, a number of Christian schooling associations worked together to publish the Cardis report on education for the common good. And the report showed that graduates from Christian schools had social, economic, employment and civic outcomes which benefited the common good, in inverted commas, in a way that was, broadly speaking, more substantial than those in other schooling sectors. And this study and the findings were a real and substantial credit to Christian schools across Australia. They point to the positive difference that Christian schools make to society in general. The report looked beyond the economic outcomes that typically define the way that education institutions are measured. It looked to the good that can come from a religiously based education, especially that offered by our independent Christian school sector. However, it is notable that the rhetorical stance of the study and the report was decidedly non-confessional, non-religious and non-sectarian, and that is appropriate. Indeed, the language of common good has been around for centuries, if not millennia, and has been used by people of faith to find non-confessional common ground with those outside the Christian church. But I would posit to you that there is actually something of a problem here. It's not a problem with the report itself. It's not a problem with the language of common good. It's not even with these attempts to connect Christian schools with the broader aims of our community and society. I think those are all really good things. But the problem I'm seeing is that eventually, and I want to suggest to you almost inevitably, someone will point out that common good outcomes can, at least in theory, be ascertained by non-confessional schools, non-Christian schools. They might argue that the Christian part of the school is not necessary to achieve the social, communal and civic goods that the Cardis report reveals. So here's the challenge. People are going to try to take over the territory that your schools have just won. Christian schools are winning on the common good front. But those who I'm speaking on behalf of without actually agreeing with what they're saying, don't worry, they will argue that this can be done by anyone, whether Christian or not. So as valuable as this data is and as valuable as the report is, and it was great, by the way, to be at the gala dinner down in Canberra at the launch of the report, to be in the room with the Prime Minister and the many MPs who were there. It was a wonderful event, and I think it was a powerful lobbying opportunity for our schools. So as valuable as this report is, as valuable as the data is, I think as valuable as the job the report's going to do, as a sector, you need to think ahead. Because there are challenges coming on all sides. The challenge I just mentioned is a pretty low stakes one. People are already making that kind of argument. They have for decades. But it points to a wider challenge. What about the challenge of religious freedom, which we're all acutely aware of course? Why should governments continue to allow Christian schools to keep their tax-exempt status in relation to tax-exempt status? Why should they also get their exempt status in relation to hiring practices? What about funding? Why should religious schools keep getting generous funding when our public schools are so under-resourced? Also, they keep claiming. What about the dangerous nature of religion? Why should religious schools be allowed to teach their beliefs to children when our society no longer holds these values, and those values might be very bad for people? Of course, I don't agree with any of this, okay, don't worry. And what's the point of Christian schools anyway? Aren't they just more expensive versions of public schools? In fact, this is an argument that's used by Christians sometimes. Some people I'm good friends with make this argument. And if public schools can theoretically get the same common good outcomes, theoretically speaking, as a Christian school, shouldn't we just defund the Christians? Because aren't we a secular society anyway? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting for a minute, I'm going to say this for the third time, I'm not suggesting for a minute that these are fair and reasonable objections to Christian schooling, and they're not objections I can agree with. I'm saying that these will be increasingly plausible objections. And this is in spite of the fact that Christian schooling creates good outcomes for its graduates and good outcomes for our wider society. So I think that we in this room today have a job to do, and a job that we will not just finish, I don't think, today, but will continue to do. It's a strategic one in that the threat that it combats is not imminent. It's not one that's about to fall on us. It's on the horizon. We have to peer down into the distance to see it, but it's coming. So it's strategic. It's also important in that it will help the Christian school sector to understand its own purpose, and it will help those outside of the Christian school sector see the value and significance of Christian schooling as well. So what I want us to consider moving towards today is finding an articulation of a distinctive vision for Christian schooling, because what the Cardis report does very effectively is articulates a non-distinctive vision for Christian schooling. It articulates a vision for the outcomes of Christian education as well as an articulation of those outcomes. But it's not distinctively Christian, it's for the common good. But if people start to argue that these common good values can be found elsewhere and in other ways, then I believe we need to think about how we can make ourselves more distinctively Christian in some ways. So I think that this vision needs to reach beyond the common good language and the common good outcomes, like we find in the Cardis report. It may need to move beyond the kind of value-neutral language that our public square prefers. And it may even need to be the kind of language that makes you feel uncomfortable. At the same time, it's a balancing act. It needs to be communicated to a post-Christian culture, one that no longer understands the lingua franca of the Christian faith. You see, ours is a culture that by and large ignores the sacred realm, the realm which is central to what we as Christian educators care about. So the big question for this session is, can we articulate a distinctive vision for Christian education to our post-Christian society? And I choose the label post-Christian quite deliberately because ours is a formally Christian society, despite the fact that the census will still tell you that there are something like more than 50% of people identifying as Christians. I think it's safe to say that it's post-Christian. But it's also, by and large, what we might call a secular society. And the concept of the secular is complex. But the philosopher Charles Taylor, while he's quite verbose and difficult, is also very helpful in that he identifies three kinds of secularity. One is where common institutions and practices are emptied of any reference to the divine. And he says basically public spaces are emptied of God or any reference to ultimate reality. If you think of one example, it would be the removal of prayer from Parliament. That would be like the final frontier of that kind of secularity being implemented. But by and large, other than that, our public spaces are pretty empty of God. That's the first kind of secularity. The second kind of secularity is the falling off of religious belief and practice, generally. That one's fairly straightforward. And then the third one is what Taylor calls a shift in conditions of belief, which is a shift where belief in God moves from being unproblematic to being difficult and more implausible. He talks about a person in 1500 in Europe finding it impossible, basically, to not believe in God, whereas today, almost the opposite is the case for a common person in our society. Now, interestingly for us as evangelical Christians, the one that probably most concerns us personally and most troubles us of those three kinds of secularity is the latter one, in that it's harder for people to accept that there is a personal, transcendent and holy God, and that really troubles us, doesn't it? Because we care about people and want people to know Jesus. But I want to suggest to you that as leaders at Christian education institutions, and perhaps paradoxically given our personal feelings, it's actually the first two kinds of secularity that should most concern us, because it's actually these that make running a Christian institution more difficult. In a society where the public square is emptied of reference to God or ultimate reality, running a school based on that assumption, a school which is open to public enrolment, has a place in the local community and whose students are expected to be representatives of the said school in the community, and this actually comes back to, it segues quite nicely with what Steve was talking about, where there's a clash between parents liking the values, but then when those values are kind of enforced, then it becomes difficult for people to accept that. When these students are expected to be representatives of our Christian schools in the community, then the school which bears the name of Jesus Christ proudly is an oddity which requires explanation and often defence. And I think this will become increasingly the case. For a Christian school is a public institution which bears not only the name of Christ, but it does so proudly and in a fashion that is central to its purpose. It's not a church and is not therefore a community of worshippers of God per se in the way that a church is. It's a school. It's a community of learners learning under the authority of God. So how can we justify this if the main aims that we define ourselves by are often devoid of spiritual content? How can Christian education institutions explain both their properly secular and properly sacred aims in a way that makes sense in a world where institutions professing the name of Christ are rapidly disappearing or altering their shape? Similarly, in a society where religious belief is steadily declining, or in our case, rapidly declining, there is a further difficulty for Christian schools, a school which bears the name of Jesus Christ but offers education to students beyond the boundaries of what might be called the visible church, has a place in the life of their community and the families associated with that school. And this place and role is challenging, because it calls us to defend, at least insofar, the education as provided being explicitly Christian. Why should a school like this continue to provide a sectarian, religious Christian education when it's servicing a constituency which is much broader and more secular than its core tenets suggest? Now, this is a problem for you to solve, not me, but I'm here as part of the conversation. And before handing over to you, I want to offer one piece of insight. It's only one piece, and there'll be dozens of other possible avenues, but I just want to give you one little idea. The late, great English philosopher Roger Scruton observed that the human person inevitably faces experiences and questions which cause incredible tension and sometimes a feeling of loneliness and an awareness of something outside of their physical existence. That he suggests that this is a normal human experience. And I think as Christians we would agree with this, and the scriptures speak to this over and over. And Scruton also notes that a person inevitably pursues both a rational answer to these problems, tries to answer the questions philosophically, if you will, but they also sometimes might pursue an irrational one, not in the negative sense of being irrational, but one that isn't necessarily summed up in propositional truths. And we as humans want to find an answer to what Scruton calls the riddle of existence. And in doing so, we are led towards both sound philosophical and theological answers, but also towards tradition and custom and worship. Now, Scruton calls this riddle a metaphysical predicament, and I won't worry you by trying to unpack that technical phrase, but let me agree with Scruton that people, all people without exception, are faced with this metaphysical predicament. All people need to explain their existence in the world. They need to act as though the thing behind the world, behind people and behind existence is sacred and requires something of us. And Roger Scruton says that in short, people actually need religion to help them live. They need religion to help them make sense of their lives. Now, some people don't like the word religion, so let's just say that as Christians, we would say that people need Jesus. So perhaps there's something that Christian schools can offer a world which is post-Christian and secular, but actually is still searching for an answer to the riddle of existence. It won't simply be apologetics, it won't simply be a Christian worldview education. It might be an openness to wonder, an openness to the things that the human spirit naturally reaches for. And that thing that the human heart yearns for is our God. Perhaps, and let me reiterate that this is just one angle on the problem we're discussing this morning, perhaps our schools can offer themselves as a gateway to fulfilling this yearning in a society that wants to remove the sacred from the public square. But the problem, restated, is how can we articulate a distinctively Christian vision for Christian schooling in our increasingly secular and post-Christian society? And so there are two things that you're doing around your tables again. One is you're going to discuss what are some things that you might consider putting in place as leaders in your schools. What are some action points that you might implement in your school, given our cultural situation and given the fact, whether it's a fact, well, it's not a fact, is it? But given the likelihood that people will try and take the ground that your schools have just won on those common good outcomes, how can you think about articulating your place, your school's place in your community? And maybe you're already doing this really well. I don't want to assume anything. The second thing is, what are some ways that your table discussion ought to impact ACS as an umbrella organisation, and what are some things that your group concluded that could be implemented by ACS? What are some things that ACS can do in response to this? So let that be a prompting for your discussion. I'm framing the discussion. This is now an open conversation. So I'll let you go to your tables and throw some ideas around. And then we'll come back, do something similar to what we did in the first session, maybe have a bit of an open discussion at the end. So I'll leave that. I'll hand over to you, and then I'll bring you back together in about 15 minutes or so. All right, you've got 30 seconds to finish your sentences or however you want to, whatever you're finishing. And I suppose we'll just do the same thing with the roving mic, I think, Paul. Yeah, that worked okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We don't have to have the same spokespeople. However, there's no rules around that, so we'll finish up. All right. I'm going to throw to the roving mic now. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, because I think this is genuinely an open question, and it's a new situation for us as Christians in our society. It's one that we just have to learn to navigate. I'm not sure what the answers are. So, roving microphone, is it on? Is it not on? Yes, it's on. All right.
Ready to go?
Yep. All righty.
Morning, everyone. Look, this is a really great topic, and we had a very rich discussion at our table. And we think the key questions you've asked today really do, cut to the heart of what concerns many of us in Christian schools. We have this sort of seed of doubt in our minds. You think the Cardis report is great, but there's a sense that we are, trying to answer the world on the world's terms, and yet as a school we've come back. After your session on Monday around Christian worldview, we feel the answers there. That we must remind ourselves we must have good answers, because that's where it is. Why are we here? It's fundamentally different to the answer that the world provides, and what are we about, and who are we? Those are fundamental questions that we're trying to, as schools, to be much clearer about. When we're sitting at a table with perhaps pre-service teachers from different schools, and they say, "Well, Greg, could I come and work at your school? I'm secular, or I'm gay, or whatever." And that perhaps looking to have that debate around, I can contribute to the common good things, but and they're perhaps going to have an argument or a conversation around the sort of trigger points that they know we're about. But if we talk about these things, about our identity being located solidly in Christ, and that our security coming from there, and our whole reason for being is serving Christ and emptying of ourselves, and those aspects of the kingdom of God, that's where they understand, that's what's required to work in a school like yours. So I guess for our schools, we're trying to articulate these reasons for being that are distinctly different from the reasons that the rest of the world has to offer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's really interesting. Yeah. Very, very interesting.
This is probably one of the big topics, I think, for today, and I think something that we need to be on the front foot of in particular. Our conversation around the distinctives really came back, I think, to what Simon said towards the end about people needing to make sense of their world. And I think one of the distinctives of a Christian school is bringing that hope, that peace, that engagement, that value. That, I think, is what will make us different. That's what Jesus did. He brought value to people, and he brought hope. And it wasn't about just head knowledge. In church yesterday, we heard the quote that even atheists can be biblical scholars. The world can understand good values and the common good, and they can understand what all that looks like from a head perspective, but they can't bring the heart, and they can't bring that real, authentic, bringing truth and hope and value to people. And I think that's the distinctive that we can bring as a Christian school, because it can be that real authentic truth, hope, not just a nice idea. As far as what we can do about it, I think we have to be on the front foot. There's no easy answers to all of those questions that Simon posed. It's one of the things that I think as schools we have to be on the front foot of. One of the things that we've done at Emmanuel, I'm the board chair of Emmanuel, so I don't know how many other board members are here or whether it's more school-based people, but I think as boards we need to be really delving into these questions. We've just, one of the things that I've just brought in with our board is a faith and formation committee that specifically will look at these topics, these questions that we're facing, how we address our religious freedom, how we actually tackle some of these topics, how we infuse that through our staff. And there aren't easy answers, but I think if you have a committed group of people who will tackle it and really pull it apart, it will start the ball rolling, and then we can share that amongst ourselves at these forums and some of the other things that ACS can run, so that we get on top of it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, very good. Diff.
Simon.
You stole a little bit of kind of where I was thinking of going already when you talked about Scruton. I think if the question is what's distinctively Christian, then I think access to objective reality is what's distinctively Christian about what we believe. And it's not just what we believe as a choice amongst many other choices. This is actual truth. So I think Christian schools offer something that no one else can offer, and that is an answer to the metaphysical loneliness that everybody experiences. I think because we believe in and can help students to come to understand and experience themselves objective reality, therefore we can help them to re-embed themselves in the story of reality. That's one of the other things that Charles Taylor talks about in his book, is the loss of story. We're just kind of aimlessly wandering around without any true direction or purpose. But, you know, one of the things about recapturing that connection with objective reality, I think that was some of the work of Francis Schaeffer and rejection of relativism, but you can almost go too far and lose sight of the subject, and subjectivity is something that God's created in us, which is a beautiful thing, so you need to find the balance between those two things. But you know, you talked also about 500 years ago it was just a given that everybody would be a Christian. I think Christian schools and Christian churches can go back through history and understand our tradition and try to work out, well, what have we lost where that's not necessarily the case anymore? Perhaps recapturing some of those things that made Christianity so central and unquestionable to pre-modern and early modern people, that over the course of time we've ceded a lot of ground, a lot of philosophical, metaphysical ground. We might have kept core tenets of theology, but I think that there's other ways that secularism has infected the church and our beliefs. Because while secular institutions might be able to offer the common good, I don't think they can offer deep, relational, ultimate truth. And without that, working towards the common good is just work. It's not a work of love and meaning and purpose. Yeah.
That's great. They can offer the common good, but not the good. Yeah, that's very good. Kindred spirit diff. It's beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
Apparently.
That'll be fun. I had well, that's way too close. I had a long think about, we've just been doing a study at home about the 7 churches of Revelation and how they relate to the evolving church throughout history. And there's a certain degree that we can actually take those same 7 churches and their key elements and apply them to Christian education and where we're at. And I encourage you to do this yourself, sit down and have a think about that. Where is your church? Where is your school in comparison to those 7 churches? Are you the persecuted church? Are you the worldly church? Are you the medieval church where you are dictating education rules, which has been in the past? Are you the denominational church where we're all trying different versions of the same thing? Are you the mission church who's seeking, the Philadelphian church who's seeking outreach? Or are you the apostate church, the lost church? The church is not actually a church, but the church has lost its way and become secular and lost its purpose. I was saying to these guys, I think part of the problem here is that the ruling focus of Christian schools has started becoming numbers and dollars, because the government throws money at us depending on how many kids we have, rather than being our overriding purpose, which was to be a Christian school. To present Christ to our students, to bring our students on that journey with us to one day end up with us in heaven. And when that starts becoming our guiding conversation, if our focus on our websites is about our academics as opposed to over our values and our Christianness, then we've probably lost our way.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we just talked about it really comes out of a matter of who we are, which goes beyond why we do what we do, how we do these things. But the world's always going to struggle to understand Christian education comes out of who we are, because this is a concept that's greatly contested in the world today. You know, you can change who you are, you can choose who you are, you can alter who you are. So there will never be a premise in which our vocabulary will align with the vocabulary of this world. So we talked more about the challenge to provide vocab that's easily understood, as we talked about in the last session, but the removal of kingdom vocabulary leads to the convenience of aligning to the language of this world. We'll always be challenged for being distinctively Christian, and the understanding of common good has that interpretation that goes with the language of this world, the good versus bad, that you can compartmentalise your life and be good in aspects of your life and not so much in other areas, but overall being a good person. So within the world we can compartmentalise that, but true Christian education needs to educate our students to understand their identity in Christ, which we can't do without distinctive kingdom vocabulary.
Great, thank you. Yeah. I'm trying to take notes as we're going here, so, all right, front table.
Did you want to say anything?
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Just gathering my thoughts. Go to another table first and come back. Thanks.
All right. Different table.
Oh, we talked about those that might stand against us and the identity politics, culture wars that we're facing, and how do we as Christian schools respond to that, and what does the horizon look like? Ultimately, you could argue that the horizon is where our society self-destructs. Ultimately, history would tell us that there will be lots of questions asked at that point. So what do we do in between now and wherever that is and whatever that looks like? And we talked about the fact that the one thing that we can't afford to do is to build walls around our schools, and that our schools need to remain wells, if you like, of life, and that we will continue to do the good works that God has called us to. And when we get to that point on the horizon, that out of that destruction and out of what that looks like, if potentially it does look like that, then our schools, if they can remain wells and they can remain inclusive, not tolerant necessarily, because we need to maintain our moral objectivity, if you like, in terms of that landscape and what that looks like, that we will continue to be places of hope. And I think in terms of, and I've thought this for a long time, and not just with ACS, but the other associations across Australia, which is one of the most powerful movements in Christian education in the world, is that fundamentally we can't afford to be strung out along the wall. If you think of Nehemiah, we need to be places where, along the wall there, where one person blows a trumpet, we all come and support each other. That analogy will break down at some point, but in terms of how do we move forward and how does ACS move forward in supporting us in this, I think we've got to move forward in unity together and provide lots of opportunities for schools to get together and talk about these things deeply, because if we are to be truly inclusive, as the gospel is, then we need to face these hard questions of life that society will throw at us, and we have to have answers to those questions, and that's hard work, and that needs to be collaborative and joined up.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Who's speaking?
We'll try again.
Me first,
Ron.
Andrew. Simon's provocation was really wonderful, and it kind of threw me. I think it all boils down to your view of the human person. Is humanity essentially good or not? Now that's a thorny one, and we have to be careful about how we might articulate that. But by and large, Australians would assume that humanity is good, and yet the Bible teaches a different way of thinking about that goodness, because we are affected, as Augustine certainly points out, by original sin. So I think if you're struggling to articulate a vision, you might have to be really careful about your language there, but think about those two alternatives. They're quite a powerful way to think. And Andrew has something wonderful to share with everyone.
Redlands College, like every school, is exploring the topics around gender identity. We've partnered with Simon and as a scholar in residence with our school to do some development about 2 documents. One's an outward-facing document to families about the types of topics that we'll address in which year levels, and the other one's an inward-facing document for our staff, exploring both our Christian living and health curriculum and talking about the practicalities of the types of way we'll engage with that. As we do that work with Simon, whatever documents we produce, we'll share with Lynn, and those will be freely available to other schools of ACS that you could potentially use as you develop that work within your schools. So we just want to acknowledge Simon and thank Simon for his engagement in that process.
Thanks, Ron, and thanks, Andrew, for engaging me. I've got the fancy title of Scholar in Residence at Redlands College, which is kind of fun. But no, it's good to be working with you, Andrew. I'm really enjoying it. Yeah. At the back there, I think. Yeah.
Anyone?
Oh, there's reluctance on the part of the spokesperson. Over to you.
Good morning. Ours was very, very simple. We were looking at, well, everyone knows the saying, to know God and to make him known. You articulated before, to know is more than just head knowledge. We, as ourselves, as our individuals, need to know him and who he is to me before I can make him known to those around me, and particularly in Christian schooling, to my parents, to my students. And under that banner, I think it's very interesting, I was sharing with the ladies, some of you may have heard David Baskerville, I am one of his, and he will tell a story that when he raised his 7 children, back in the early days of Christian schooling, it was, here is the law, boys, pull your socks up or you're not getting into heaven, girls, dresses below your knees. And there were rules and regulations for raising children and students in Christian education. This is how we get them into the kingdom of God. And his 7 children were raised in very much the same way. And the joke today is that David Baskerville smacked his children into heaven and right out the other side. And so as a grandfather now, giving advice to his children, he would say, love them. Love them. Do not be the brick wall to them because, and as the ladies were saying, people are searching. They're scared. Society, the way it's going, they're looking for answers. They're looking for a truth. They're looking for something beyond what the National 9 News feeds them every night. So we need to be there to have those answers, to show what love is, to know it ourselves and to make it known every single day, to not speak it, but to live it, to be it, so that when they get to that point where they're ready to have that revelation for themselves, we can be that hope in their world. Because without it, we're going to have people who walk around lost.
Thank you. Yeah. We've got a couple of quick ones, I reckon. Do we want to get to our next segment before morning tea?
Our understanding or our thoughts with the fact that we really believe that parents today are really searching for the Christian message, and particularly forgiveness, salvation, redemption, Christian, love, grace, and that's still a very, very powerful tool. So we believe we should be promoting that strongly, not just character development based on Christian principles, that's fantastic, but it goes beyond that. And of course that can only happen by Christian staff, because it's a fact that we teach them out of who we are, not just our skill set. So that's why we need to employ Christian staff, so that their relationship with God can flow through everything that they do. And when you're talking about articulating the vision, I believe the best way to articulate a vision is for parents to see it and to experience it. So if they're experiencing their children getting great results, doing well at sport, whatever it might be, or seeing them really grow in their character, that's a great testament to the vision of a Christian school. And that's what I believe can separate Christian schools from other schools, is be able to see that and experience that. And to me, there's no substitute for that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Last table. In 30 seconds, yeah.
30 seconds. We probably came at it I came at it a slightly different angle, in that we're a regional school. And so part of the question that I said after we said everything that we agreed with was, what's this look like in 15 years? You spoke about less people becoming Christian. At the same time, people are leaving teaching, less people are going into teaching. Who delivers this in 15 years' time? And so I was talking for us as a regional school, sometimes it's difficult to get that physics teacher who's a Christian at that point in time to come to the town in which you are.
Yep.
And if you don't have that person, then who's delivering that vision? So that's,
Yep.
and then just from our context, what we've had a group of students going through, and even after they've left school, we've been supporting them and through their university studies and talking to them about the importance of going into Christian teaching, so that there is people to deliver that in sort of 15 years or so.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, that's a demographics challenge, isn't it? Yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks for a great discussion, everyone. We'll leave it. We'll have to leave it there because we need to move on to the next segment. But I really appreciate your time and your thoughts. I'm learning from you more than probably you're learning from me. So I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Simon, thank you so much. This is a little gift of appreciation. One of the things that I certainly took away was just that element of the written curriculum versus the unwritten curriculum, and so much of a need to bring that unwritten curriculum into writing, recognising that our parents and our families, depending on their background, still might not understand the heart transformation that occurs within Christian education and fully comprehending and understanding Jesus. So, yeah, it's a lot of thoughts. So thank you very much. Before we break for morning tea, we have a message from one of our sponsors this morning. Graham from NGS Super is just going to come and present to us for 5 minutes or so. Or less, no more, okay? No more, but certainly 5 minutes you've got. So let's just welcome Graham up this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I won't take 5 minutes just before your morning tea break. That's suicide. There's been a wonderful spirit in this room this morning. Clearly, you all care very deeply for your people, and those 2 sessions have just proven that. And I think that's where we have a commonality, believe it or not, is that we also care very deeply for our membership. We have, to be in spirit for today, we have what we believe is a very sacred duty, and that's as custodians of our members' retirement savings. Currently, there's about $13 billion of our members' retirement savings that we're looking after. So we take that job very, very seriously. And we take it very seriously, and we believe it's a sacred responsibility because the job that we're going to do with those funds is going to have a big impact on the quality of life that those people will have once their working time is finished. But we can't do it alone. We very much require the buy-in and the help of people like yourselves as leaders and emerging leaders in your schools to help embrace our same vision of enhancing the retirement savings of our members, of your people. And you can help us do that by welcoming us into your schools, allowing us to perform our duties, which we have a very personalised service model where we believe in intimate one-to-one, face-to-face consultation with our members to give them the knowledge and the tools that they can have to have a positive impact on what their retirement savings are going to look like. And then, of course, have a positive impact on the quality of life that they'll be able to have in retirement. So we would have members to varying degrees in all of your schools. I'm here with my colleague Tana today, and there are a few other of us in the NGS office in Queensland. We travel throughout Queensland to visit our schools, to talk to members and potential members. And as I said, we take that role very, very seriously, and we would certainly appreciate any support and help you can offer us from your positions to try and make our reach go a little bit further. So we appreciate being here today. We have been here for a number of years supporting your organisation, and again, that's a testament to the sort of fund that we believe NGS is, that we are very heavily invested in the education sector and giving back to those organisations in those sectors that support us. We think it's important, we think it's vital, and we think this needs to be a relationship of equals. So we're very appreciative of the help that you give us. So thank you for your time and giving a few minutes to me. I appreciate it. And please come and make yourself known to us so we can talk further about how we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graham, and thanks for sponsoring today and making today possible. We're going to be breaking very shortly with morning tea. I don't think it's quite out yet, but we have got a 30-minute break. Can I encourage everyone to use this time to meet new people, to network, to have some conversation, and maybe as a bit of a topic, if you get an awkward silence in any of your conversations, perhaps ask the person, what is the best thing about that you love about your work? I think that that's something that is really important to make sure that we share those stories in terms of what it means for you. So if you do have that awkward silence, you've at least got one question that you are armed with, ready to go. And I also think that, and I know that as we love doing this to our students, but we hate it when it happens to us. Looking around the room, it looks like we've got a lot of people who may be sitting at tables with people that they already know or work with. Given that we can still move around a little bit and take our cups and our waters, can I encourage people to maybe look at sitting at a different table, because then we'll get a different train of thought and a different aspect to the discussion moving into our third session after morning tea. I know that you will all jump at that opportunity, and potentially maybe too some of the tables that have less people on it, combine them into some larger tables just to have that conversation flowing. I'll leave it with you as good leaders in the school. I know that you will do the right thing and won't begrudge what I have just suggested. So we are going to break for lunch now. It's a beautiful day, but we can also stay here. Please make a note that these doors here are emergency exits. So if you are going to head outside, maybe head down that way. Bathroom's up the back, and enjoy your morning tea. Don't forget about that awkward silence question. Thank you.